Yeah, so the Batmobile, and I try to tell people, I said, it's just like the Enterprise, and one of the questions they wanted me to ask was, hey, do you think that the last two issues of the Ecto One, which never came out, were actually created? And I said, I think the whole entire 3D model has to be created before they do anything. Before they tool a single piece, they have to have every part built in a 3D
So
model.
just on that, it's a very practical thing.
Sure,
When you initially create the build up, you have to run all of the tools together to make sure that everything fits before you start doing it piece by piece.
sure.
So typically, when you see the photography that launches something, that has been made by running all of the tools and assembling it to make sure that it works. There may be some subtle differences because as you go forward, you find that things could be improved a little bit. It's like, oh, actually, it would be better if this happened or that happened. But yes, so the tooling is created for all of the models right at the beginning. So this is not a tooling issue with things being completed. There is a manufacturing issue as to whether those parts have been manufactured and shipped and where they are. And the supply chain is very complicated, and there are a lot of things that are kind of gummed up in there that people are looking at now and trying to work out what's where. And if we could find a happy solution, how would we actually do it from a logistical point of view, or how would whoever does it do it?
Right. Yeah, it's and that's why I try to tell people. They're like, is there, is it pot? Because now that people are trying to 3D create, because basically the one is just a roof rack. That's all it's left, right? And so people are trying to 3D print it and try to design it themselves and things like that. And I said, I think they're coming.
Yeah.
Are they produced? Maybe they might even be sitting in a warehouse in China for all we know. I mean, it's. I think they're coming. It's just. I imagine if I was PCT, I got to think, okay, I got to buy up all the stock. I got to find out where it is. I got to inventory it all. Then I have to figure out how am I going to pick up the subscriber base. And this doesn't have to be PCT; it could be anybody. But just trying to pick up all the pieces, even if you get the license to be able to pick up those subscriptions where people left off, right? And there's a lot of people
Yeah.
that went after and got refunds, and then how do you support the people that got refunds?
Well, I think the thing that everyone has to understand is that anything that you had a relationship with Eaglemoss, that relationship is over because there is no more Eaglemoss.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so the idea of complete continuity is very difficult.
yeah. And
What
I mentioned. Oh, go ahead.
what is likely to happen is that whoever steps in and takes over would contact everybody and say, okay, we are in a position to continue this. Tell us where you are in your subscription, where you want to pick up, and then we will supply you from that point. The idea that it's possible that someone will have all the data and they will be able to go to you and say, okay, you're on shipment 27. We will send you shipment 28. But as you say, there are people who've got refunds or people who didn't get things that the system perhaps shows they should have done or whatever. So it's quite likely that whoever steps in will offer people the opportunity to start from wherever they want to in their collection.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that would be most likely. I know there was a suggestion that they would just throw up a web shop that would have all the issues and you just buy them individually. I think it's much more likely they'll say, where do you want to start? What issue do you need to start on? Right. And just pick it up from there. The gifts, the display cases, the bases, things like that was, I think, through Eaglemoss. They were all made by different manufacturers. A lot of people were paying $1 for the premium base, for example, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's just gone. We just have to kind of write that off. Now, it doesn't mean that the new buyer might create one.
Exactly.
Right?
There's always the possibility that
Sure.
whoever steps in to
But
fill
I
it will
would,
be able to offer something.
yeah,
But they won't have had any of them. You have to realize from their point of view, they won't have had any of the money from Eaglemoss.
right.
So they didn't get that money. I
Yeah,
know that people have spent it, but unfortunately, whoever steps in, they won't. They
yeah,
didn't get that money. They don't have it. So they're starting a fresh relationship with people.
yeah.
And the dispute that people have, or the disappointment people have, is with Eaglemoss, not with whoever steps in.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll get through these. Well, hopefully we can get through them quick.
Okay, see what I cannot.
Yeah. Say what you can. If you can't, they'll do the best. I love the look, by the way. This looks good.
Oh, I need that. Yeah, I look more and more like Father Christmas. I haven't trimmed my beard.
The first one actually has nothing to do with Partworks. It just says, any idea what will happen to the Batman novel collection?
It depends on which territory you're in as to how that might shake out. It's an international collection, and they probably have different solutions everywhere in the world. Um, I Nobody has really seriously addressed that one yet. The priority has been the build-ups.
I would think so. Okay, let's see. I asked you about this before, and this is what I think triggered the phone call. What happened between the first release and the redesign? I saw we got some saucer rim windows and some things like that with the Enterprise D, right? So that was released.
Yeah. So what you have to understand is that that first release is actually a kind of testing process. And there comes a point when you've been developing something for years and years and years that people are just like, look, we just have to do this. And specifically with the windows on the rim of the saucer, we had originally been told that it was impossible. And we came back and said, look, there has to be a solution. We have to find a way of doing this because it just doesn't deliver. So that's those kind of improvements were made at that point to make it a better product.
Was there other stuff? This is just for me. Was there other stuff that was done?
Yeah, there were. Yes, I mean there was 2 pages of improvements.
Because I noticed there was the 3 little slots that are on top of the nacelles in front of the serrations. They disappeared.
Yes, that I was annoyed about. That was something that snuck through because they didn't tell me they'd made that change, and it wasn't on the list of things I'd asked for to be changed.
Yeah.
So when
it was on the first one.
I checked all the things that I had asked for to be changed, and I assumed that they wouldn't have changed any of the things that were right before, and that was my mistake for not being careful enough.
You know Trekkies though, they're particular.
Oh, and they're right. I'm very frustrated by that particular thing.
I'm one myself, and I've done a lot of stuff to improve the Eaglemoss one.
Sure.
So we were pretty much already answered that one, so I'm going to skip that. That was about the complaining, the finished issues, right? The remaining issues, the tooling being done in advance. This one is, why wasn't the Enterprise name and registry numbers printed on the saucer when they clearly went through that effort to place it on other parts of the model?
Because of the panel joints.
And that's what I thought too.
So if you the accuracy of the lining up was ultimately, we decided the factory would never achieve it. So it was a trade-off between people having something where the letter might not be perfectly aligned or having to apply it themselves.
Yeah. Well, the studio models were what slides? They were they were decals on the studio model too. So
yes, yes. I mean, we felt it was the best solution. The alternative is that you would have had to have everything aligned so millimeter, micron accurate to get the lettering to go across the panels. It was just unrealistic.
That makes sense. Another one was, why were the nacelle EM projectors serrated pieces orange?
That was a correction that was supposed to have been made that came through on the early parts. If you look on the studio model, they are actually kind of much more like that. That was a frustration. A correction that was asked for and not delivered at that point.
What's interesting about that is that I went out to I took pictures. I took a whole bunch of pictures of the 6-foot model. It was out at Skirball out in California for on display, and it's in the private collection, right? Obviously, Paul Allen bought the big one from the big Christie's auction, and then now it kind of travels around. And that is more of a gold. It's a dark yellow gold.
We have to remember also it was repainted a couple of times during the.
But I noticed that the same orange is used on all the Starship collections, right? It's the same, that orange band is the same orange that I see on the shuttles and things like that. And it's just now that it seems like it was an issue, But that was just one of the questions. The next one was, why is the lighting in individual windows made so complicated? Couldn't have been an LED strip and used instead?
No, it couldn't be an LED strip. That's the simple answer. Yeah. There is no, it doesn't work that way because it just doesn't work that way.
I tried to explain because I did put an LED strip in mine, but it was not easy because
Yeah.
the skeleton is in between, right? And you would see
exactly.
windows and things like that. So
and also, how many LED strips are you talking about?
yeah, and to get it all lit correctly,
Yeah.
A question for myself is that there was a lot of places in the enterprise where they used window panels that had all the windows pre-made, and another one, and then most of the panels are individual windows. Was that just a decision just to add more complexity to the model?
If you actually, the way they made the mold is they actually put tiny pieces of paper on and then sprayed it, and then it's literally the thickness of the paint for some of this stuff. The complexity, again, this is the difference between the 12-footer, the 6-footer, and the 2-footer. It's a compromise between the three different models, and we know they are meant to be windows, and we're not making a replica of the studio model exactly. We're making a replica of the ship as it appears in the show.
Yeah. The decision to include 5 different battery packs, couldn't the star drive have been wired together as a single unit?
No, all of this is left to the factory to come up with what is actually achievable.
Is that so? The design is sent to them, and then they come back and say, "Okay, this can't be done."
Yeah, this is how you do this. This is the best way to do this. So I'm not an electrician. I will sit there and say this is what the end result should be, and they will say this is the best way to achieve that.
That makes sense. A lot of concern about how the saucer is going to connect to the neck, right?
Yeah.
A video surfaced showing that process.
There are little brackets that hold the docking clamps up, and when you do that, it locks.
Yeah, and there was a video that showed it, right? And it just came out. I think Nexus, Kevin Kilford put it out, and it showed somebody putting it together. It was on the stand, and they brought the saucer up, and it showed all those docking clamps stuck in the upright position.
Yes, as long as the docking clamps are held in, but you have little brackets to hold the docking clamps up, and as long as they're in place, then it locks.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I know the saucer weighs a lot, right?
It does. It weighs a ton.
I hope. It seems like it may not hold it. That's a lot of weight to throw on the front of that, but it's obviously designed to do it.
It does. I mean, yeah.
And there was never any intention to have a second display stand, right? To support.
And that is actually something that we were discussing, because actually the solution of displaying the saucer alongside the star drive section, it's something that we probably consider now. The biggest, it's one of those things that as you go along, you think, oh, actually there should be that. But there was never we never actually had to have a 2-stand solution, if you see what I mean, when it's in joined mode.
Right.
It does. There's a bit of an issue with it being just a tiny bit top heavy. So, making the stand completely parallel is something that we were still playing around with. And the factory sent us pictures of it. And then when we were trying to do it, it's like, well, ours isn't completely parallel like that. What are you doing? And they go, well, it's fine. You just need to do this. And that was the point at which.
Just tilt it like this. It'll be fine.
Yeah. I mean, it's, there's a little bit of work just to resolve that, but it's tiny. I mean, we're not talking about anything like this. I mean, we're just talking about it being slightly off.
Yeah, I saw some of the pictures of you at that Comic-Con with the prototype.
Yeah.
Changing a lot of batteries, and
yes, and treating it in a way that it shouldn't be treated. It's not designed to be carted around. It's meant to be a display piece.
Yeah. This is for me. Did you usually end up with more than one prototype, or do you have to take it one prototype and you haul it around everywhere?
You get, so on that one in particular, the original traditional process of doing it would be that you would have a resin handmade prototype that you had at the earlier stage, which you use to sign off on everything before they make the tools, because obviously the tools are a massive investment, and once you've made the tools, you don't want to be trying to change them in any significant way. You can make subtle changes to them, but you can't, scrapping them is an expensive business. And then what happens is they run a certain number through the tools to make sure that everything fits and to check everything. traditionally we would have only had one that was fully painted up and all of that. But because of the changes in the marketing methods and the need to have one on display in the UK and one on display in the US and stuff like that, we started to get more. So we've had anything between 4 and 6.
Oh, wow.
Initial, but they're not prototypes, they are deco samples. They are actually made from the tools. You can still change things like the paint and the colors and things.
They're about as close as you're going to get to the real.
But the actual geometry isn't going to change at that point.
Yeah. Very nice. This one's interesting. Did the prototype have the same light leaks the production model did?
The one you see is the real thing. So if people are getting light leaks, I mean, it's because they're not fitting it together tightly enough.
Yeah.
I mean, there is inevitably a tiny amount of light leak, but if people are getting big light leaks, it's either because they haven't got all the parts and haven't tightened it all up together, or because they haven't been quite careful enough putting stuff together.
Yeah, I know a lot of the promotional models. Oh, sorry.
No, that's what I was going to say.
Oh, a lot of the promotional models didn't have the lights on, and so that led people to believe
the first one we had, the lights didn't work.
Oh, gotcha.
So we had one without the lighting kit in it, which is why the lights weren't on. But the ones that you see with the lights on, that is it. I mean, that's not photoshopping or anything like that. That's the actual model. It's the same as the one that people are going to get. So
I know starting an issue, I think issue 20 or so, the magazines, now the one on the cover is now lit, right? So
yeah, so that was the point at which we got the one with all the lights working. We were able to photograph.
Yeah. Well, that's something I was going to ask is, when this is done, I've kind of come to the conclusion that Eaglemoss is responsible for making the magazines, right? So writing all the articles and doing all the editorial, and the copy and the art and all that. Were all the magazines created in
Not
advance?
Quite. Almost.
Or do they do them kind of as they go?
As you go. So they're almost all done, but not quite.
Yeah, because I think at some point if whoever buys this, they might just get instructions and that's it, right? They might not.
No, I think they'll get the whole thing.
You think so? Okay.
Yeah,
it's good.
Yeah.
This is a curious one. This one's kind of fun. You mentioned in an interview with Trek Central that it's important to convince new investors to do anything other than the Enterprise D is worthwhile. Mm-hmm. Is the D the most popular or profitable ship to sell and license? And what are your thoughts on the other Enterprises, Voyager, DS9?
You have a toss-up really between doing the two most popular ships are the D and the refit, or the A. You would call it the A, but I always think of it as the refit. And you could do either one of those. You probably successfully if it's the first one that you do. The issue is that when you come to do the second one, how many people think, I still haven't built the first one? Or, or maybe that wasn't for me, it took too long, whatever. You generally expect the second one you do to be less popular and less successful than the first one. And that's just a rule with all kind of part works. So, by the time you get down to Hachette's 6th Marvel graphic novel collection, it's right. the first one's still going, and the others are shorter and shorter, basically. So in terms of popularity, it's the D, the A, the original series, but that doesn't really lend itself to a massive model in the same way because it's such a, Matt was insistent that it had such a plain exterior. And those are by far the most popular. Once you get to the others, I'm sure there is some interest, but whether you can reach a high enough number to make it worth doing, and whether if people had already built the other ships, there would still be enough of them were keen to do their third or their fourth,
Right.
It's a bit of an unknown.
Was that an intention of Eaglemoss? If the D was successful, the part work build up, if that was successful to do, because this is for me, was it success, to move on to?
Yeah, we'd started. I mean, I don't think it's a secret to say we'd started work on looking at the refit.
I would have loved to have done it. That would have been fantastic.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not impossible that someone will want to pick that up.
Yeah, because I mean, again, if somebody, if like Bernard said, if somebody buys that IP or buys the assets, something's already been created if the 3D model exists. Or
Yeah, I mean, the issue with the A, I guess, is that it's not anything that's been tooled. There's a massive amount of investment has gone into it, so the chances are that a lot of the cost has already been sunk.
sure,
So it makes a lot more sense to carry on with it. The A hadn't been tooled. The Batmobile had, but there are reasons why the licensing might be difficult on that one.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's an interesting concept. All part works are to me. I mean, it's an interesting concept. It's a lot of money to put up front to hope it sells. You know what I mean?
Yes, it is. It's
a lot of work, a lot of time, to get involved.
Yes.
All right, this one's about the DeLorean. Were you happy with the flux capacitor in the DeLorean?
Of course not. Of course not. I mean, there are certain things where you keep saying, "Can we make this better? Can we make this better?" And the answer is not for what we are reducing the model for.
Right.
And the model's already expensive. Let's be clear. This is not a cheapo thing. And I know people are always like, "Well, it should have been better." It's like, well, okay, but it would have been $200 more. I mean, it's so there are, in the cockpit of the DeLorean, there are two things that I wanted, but we just couldn't do for the budget, and it would have made it, was that, and I wanted the Christmas tree lights behind the seats at pulse and have a pattern as they do in the film.
Sure.
But that was just beyond what we could achieve.
Thankfully, we have a very nice modding community that created those for us.
Exactly. I think that's the kind of thing someone can step in and do that. That's great. But we just couldn't deliver it on the cost. And we were already, we were absolutely pushing the top of what we could afford to spend on that model.
Yeah, I'd imagine if somebody picks out and says, okay, this is worth this much and this is how much we can spend, and there's
you just get a kind of like, well, if you do that, the price is going to go up to this, and you're like, well, but that just then breaks far more than, it's not as simple as that.
Awesome. Let's see. Well, yeah, I already asked that one. We already got through that. It's made up a good that one. Say a stage is has a problem. How long does it take to get replacements? Does the factory have to retool to go back and make previous stages, or are they, and I think what they mean by that is, can they make any stage at any time, or do they,
Well, that's why you run all the tools at the beginning. So what is that everything can be put together, everything does fit. I mean, the classic one was that on the DeLorean, it's an automatic, but we've given it a manual gearbox. Now, amazingly, no one in Japan noticed that, and normally the Japanese people are the most aware.
Really?
And to be honest, I think you have to be pretty knowledgeable to be able to look at the gearbox and go, that's an automatic, and this is a manual car. So in that case, we fixed that and changed it to being an automatic, and we had to alter a couple of the parts around it to fit. But that's the only instance I can think of where a part was wrong.
Yeah. I mean, I've talked to some other people at Eaglemoss, and they mentioned the DeLorean and how that, when it was scanning, I believe they used Terry Metallis's replica to scan.
We used Terry's car for the DeLorean part, but the engine and the gearbox and all of that was a standard DeLorean.
Oh, gotcha.
So we didn't use. So we basically they 3D scanned. They didn't 3D scan Terry's car. We went and photographed Terry's car, and then they 3D scanned a standard, an unmodified DeLorean.
And it got missed. I mean,
yes.
People at Eaglemoss probably wouldn't know the difference between the transmissions. How do you look at them and go, oh,
I certainly didn't. I mean,
I couldn't tell you a PR. I could tell you now after building one, but
sure.
What a PR.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, this one I think I put in here was, are the licenses for each different build obtained per territory? Right. So if you want one in the US,
it varies depending on the licensor as to how they structure the deals. It's quite boring but complicated. It varies. It depends on the company.
Yeah, and it's just like what you said about, like if the PCT got Europe, they don't have US, and is that a licensing thing?
That's nothing in that particular case. That's not to do with the licensing. It's to do with where the stock was and how the databases are divided and how Eaglemoss was divided.
Yeah, because I don't know how it affects Eaglemoss Inc., right? Which would technically be a completely separate company with their own.
It's a wholly owned subsidiary, so
right.
It's not as if it can survive on its own.
No, the people I talked to work for them, and they're not working anymore. So
yeah, absolutely.
But it's I didn't know if maybe they held the licenses versus Eaglemoss Limited over.
Normally, the licenses were held by Limited. There are one or two exceptions.
That makes sense. This one I think we kind of already touched on is, do you know where the 66 Batmobile was in the process? Do you think it'll be released? Right.
So yeah, the Batmobile is tooled, but hadn't actually shipped any parts out to anybody. So we are, that is going to be a licensing issue. I think something where people have already started it's a very different situation to something where people haven't started.
Yeah.
Priority has to be people who have started.
Yeah, this is something that just popped in my head is the instruction guides. Are those created by the manufacturer? I mean, and I talk about the instruction diagrams, the ones that show the model and being pieces together. Is that put together by the manufacturer, or is that something that Eaglemoss does?
It's something that we did. We are sent a form of instruction guide that comes from the manufacturer, but it's not pretty enough to be printed.
Yeah.
So, or clear enough necessarily.
Right.
So they send us how this goes together, and then we create the instructions from that. And you'll see that in some cases it's done with photographic steps, and sometimes it's done with CAD data, which is rendered to give you the line artwork.
Right. Yeah. So what do we got? So I think we kind of touched on this. This one they asked, what did Eaglemoss have in the pipeline that did not make it for sale because of either licensing or going into administration?
Yeah, I don't know. I can say any more than I have already said about that.
Okay. That's all
right.
Yeah, this one's more. Now we're about generally just Eaglemoss. Many people are concerned about Eaglemoss operations for the last year or more, based on delays, the issue with Kenco. The third party CS just didn't really know what was going on. They were kind of detached. Did you have any idea Eaglemoss was in trouble before they went into admin?
Yeah, I mean, yes, we had some idea. There were restrictions on what the staff could say to anybody. There were various points at which it looked as if it would have a much happier outcome than it did.
Yeah.
So for a lot of that time, it was difficult within Eaglemoss, but there were reasons to think that the whole company would be sold, and it would have been able to continue, or there would have been major investment. So people were working to try and make those things happen, and then they just didn't happen. So
yeah, I know that there was records of, I think it looked like loans from Santander back in April. I don't know if that was.
I mean, any company operates with a loans from a banker supported by their bank. I mean, that wasn't. I mean, ultimately that becomes an issue, but that wasn't related to that. I mean, it was more a case of. I mean, I'm not privy to all of these conversations, but basically the management hoped that they would be able to sell the company. 2 potential buyers fell through, and that's why we've ended up where we are.
Yeah. I know that the appointment to administrators finally showed up on the company's house, right? I think you had mentioned it officially happened on the 5th is when they let you go.
Yes. I mean, I think yes. I mean, we were made redundant at that point. I believe actually it took another 4 days to actually go through.
Yeah. And I know that but it, they kind of disappeared back on July 12th, right? All the communications cut off, everything like that.
So there's it's something I've learned a lot about, but there's a process where you state your intention to do something, and at that point you have your restrictions on what you can do and can't do, and you have to behave in a certain way.
Yeah.
It offers you some protections and all that. So
is that basically you have to freeze trading? I mean, that's what they call it UK, right?
Yes. I mean, you're saying that I can no longer trade correctly. So I am applying for administration. you then have a certain time frame in which certain things can happen, or you attempt to make certain things happen before you actually enter administration.
Yeah.
So, the idea is that you realize as much cash as possible for the creditors.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I already asked that one. There's only two more left, which is, what part work would you have liked to see created? If you could have any part work, which one would you have had built?
As a build-up, I don't know. You spend a lot of time. I suppose I think about that in very pragmatic and very, could we actually do this way?
Do you think of the logistics of it before you think about
it? Would people buy it? Would
Right.
it be interesting enough? And so I think I probably come up with very different answers. But also, most of the things that I wanted to do happened because I was in the position to make them happen.
Right.
So, I mean, the first one I did was the DB5. I'm still enormously proud of that. I still think it's a
I have it. I built it, and it was, interesting enough. It's interesting to see how partworks have changed since then, right? I mean, that was 2011. I think that was back when it was with GE Fabry, right?
Yes, so I worked at GE.
Yeah, yeah, and it was. There's only, you look at these partworks now. They have 1,000 parts. They have 800 parts, and ironically, the DB5 had 261 parts, and it had 261 screws to put it together. That was a total coincidence, I'm sure.
Yes.
But I put it together, and it was surprisingly, the instructions were awful, but the model was fantastic. I mean, the instructions were not great because they jumped around a lot. They say, okay, in 2 steps from now, you're going to come back and you're going to build this part and things like that. But the model was great, but you can just see how things got more complex, right? They started taking pieces that were pre-assembled, start taking them apart, and you put those together as the kind of the part work progressed from there.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing. So the DB5 was the first time that we really moved to 1/8 scale. And that, at least in part, is because it's such a tiny car.
Yeah.
If you ever get to see one in person, they are, they're not big cars.
Yeah.
But previously, things had been done at 112. So there were Ferraris and things like that had been done at 112. So we were the first people to shift to 1/8, and that was my recommendation because of the size of the car. And that change in scale takes a little while for people to sort of filter through and go, well, actually, if you're making a bigger model, then some of the parts can now be assembled and be more complex. And and also, I think we found that there was an appetite for things to be more complex and more realistic, I guess. To put more effort into the accuracy of a suspension or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I love the large scales. I'm building a ton of them. I really enjoy the large scale models because I think you can add more detail and you feel more invested in it, right? Yeah. I love the idea of metal, versus putting together a plastic kit or something.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So from there, when we were doing the DB5, we realized that actually the DeLorean would probably be the next thing to do. And that was also great. And going and seeing, getting Terry's out of his garage and getting it started was one of the better days of my life.
I bet.
And then the interesting thing is when you look at the Ecto or the Batmobile, those are not little cars at all. They are fast hulking things, but we were still doing 1/8. So they become really substantial. So yeah, obviously the entertainment stuff is my specialty.
Sure. I love that stuff. It's, to me, those one-off cars that were, I've mentioned, like, when people ask, like, what kind of part works would I like to see? I always say like Johnny Five, the robot from Short Circuit, right? Very unique. You recognize it instantly, right? I built the fan home Dodge Charger, right? But it's just a Dodge Charger. It has a big engine, but for the most part, it's a Dodge Charger, right? And the kit, the Knight Rider, right? I think I'm going to build that too. But again, it's really just an 82 Trans Am with a nice dash, right? You could have bought that Pontiac off the lot looking exactly like that with bowling ball hubcaps and everything. But the DeLorean wasn't, right? The DeLorean was something special. And the Ecto 1 was something special. It was something you couldn't just
Could
go
buy.
buy.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's my drive to those cars. Like I think Airwolf, I would build Airwolf if it ever came out in a scale model, large, like a part work. Because it's different enough. It's not just a Bell 222 helicopter. It's Bell 220 with pods and an interior of all interesting things and rocket launchers and things. It's just enough to make it so it's not just a stock car that maybe has just as a paint job. Like the 18
I
family
think,
have no
yeah,
interest in.
I mean, I was like, no one's going to want to build the 18.
Right.
It's a van. It's a van. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but that was my,
Yeah.
my take was it had to be an interesting model in itself. And I do think, I mean, I think that little group of models that I was personally, deeply involved with and very responsible for, it probably covers the kind of real highlight things. Like you say, the rest of them, there's some cool things,
Yeah.
but they are basically standard cars.
Yeah. When you start looking at stuff that Barris did, or you look at stuff that Sheaf did, so unique.
There is one other thing that I want to do, but I don't want to say in case I jinx it or in case it can still happen.
Oh, come on.
I'm sorry. I don't want it to. There are people out there who may or may not need to work with me. So if I put my really great idea out there and someone else does it, I will be really annoyed.
I did skip over 2 Starship questions. I know that the Starship collection is kind of your baby. So the question is did Eaglemoss ever produce any more USS Rhode Islands?
Any more than what? I mean, all of the ships got some degree of production. I mean, we did the Rhode Island.
I think they mean.
I think there were various things. I mean, what people may be referring to is there are various things that have been out of stock in the shop.
Yes.
There would all the Starfleet ships were down for more production. There's a subscription that we launched which was only Starfleet ships, but it covered all of the Starfleet ships, so there would be more volume produced of each of those. So my expectation was that all Starfleet ships would get made again, would be available. Some of the more obscure ones probably wouldn't get made again.
Right.
Whereas some of the kind of more obscure alien ships, it's like unlikely that they would ever get produced again. But the Starfleet stuff, I kind of think, there's good reason to think a little bit.
And then did they ever get to make the Riemann
Scorpion?
And the Prelor ships?
Sure where we got to with the Prelor and the Kravik are the same. Oh, they were the next special. They were the next bonus issues. I'm not sure where they were in the supply chain. There were a lot of things where we might have placed an order for something, but it didn't get manufactured because things hadn't been paid for, or things got to a certain point, but not further. I would have to check whether they actually went into production or not. I don't know off the top of my head. Yeah. They were approved. I mean, they were finished and approved, but whether they actually went into production is another question.
Are they done very the same way as the part works? I mean, you got to build a 3D model of it. You got to get all the paint.
Yeah. Well, in most cases, we use the original visual effects models as the basis for the little ship. Those two are actually exceptions because there wasn't an original digital model for the Prelor and the Kravik.
Does that actually make it easier?
Sorry?
Does it make it easier when, as time went on, obviously they got away from physical?
It makes it more accurate. I mean, you can't get it. I mean, you can't be more accurate than the thing that appeared on screen.
Right.
I mean, one of the things I remember we did a freighter, so the ECS Fortunate really early on, and it had decals on the cargo pods that nobody knew were there until we made the model. And then, once people started to get their 4K TVs and that kind of stuff, then it became apparent that actually that was always there, but you couldn't see it until you got the model. Or when we discovered there was a typo,
Yeah.
And it turns out, yes, there is a typo, but it's in the show. I mean, we replicated the typo from the show.
Hey,
That
studio
kind of
accurate,
thing.
right? Screen
Yeah,
accurate.
exactly. That kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a question I have is, when, they marketed the Enterprise D as a kind of a amalgamation of all three models, the 2 foot, the 4 foot, and the 6 foot.
Yeah.
Did you have access to scan the originals? Did you, because I know when they got to generation,
No,
I think they had
no.
CGI
They
models.
were the D or the Galaxy class is one thing that's never been a really high quality mesh of those, not an official one anyway. They're
Right.
very span built ones.
Sure.
But even the one that appears in Picard, they borrowed from us, I think. I don't know if they used the one they borrowed from us in the end, but there will be a better mesh of the Galaxy class made, but that hasn't been a really
Yeah, well, because I know that when they did the remaster of the Next Generation, right? There's a couple shots that they did replace with CGI.
yeah, a few. But
And
most of that is actually the original model shots. I mean,
yeah,
that's the extraordinary thing about that. Is that they were able to recomposite the shots because they were all shot on film.
yeah, yeah. I'm a Trek fan. I don't know if I'm quite full Trekkie, but I'm a Trek fan for sure. And I actually went through and captured, because I have the whole collection, and I went through and captured every screenshot of the 4 foot model. And you get to learn where you can tell which is the 2 foot, which is the 4 foot, which is the 6 foot.
Yeah,
I captured
certainly.
every screenshot of the 4 footer because that's what I wanted to base my part work on, like the lighting setup and
Sure.
which colors the lights are and things like that. And it was interesting because it does look like the model, the part work buildup, the Windows layout was based on the 4 foot model, because
Yeah.
they almost exactly match. I mean, almost exactly. Not so much on the Star Drive. There's some glitchy lights going on in there. And I know some people had some concerns about the Star Drive windows jumping all over the place when they kind of follow the deck lines. But for like on the saucer, it was almost a perfect match, which didn't match the Sternbach blueprints that were used in the magazine that don't match. Those are different. But yeah.
Yes, I mean it's you have to remember these things. I mean I'm very close with Dan Curry. So I did a book with Dan, and Dan's like, no, they're really different, really different. And he said if you want to make this really accurate, you have to put the coffee stain on the top of the 4 footer where Gary left his cup on the top.
Right.
So yeah, that's
Well, and it's like the 2 foot model, if people they say want screen accurate, the 2 foot model didn't have really lighting in it. It used reflective tape on the windows. The lights were those huge bulbs that you could see from a distance. They were way out of scale. If people wanted a 2 foot model, I think if they actually shipped the 2 foot model to their house, they'd be disappointed.
Oh yes, no, people would be horribly disappointed in the. Even if you actually see the 4 foot in person, it's not. It's the finish on it. You can see the wood. I mean, you can.
The screenshots expose that. Those HD remasters, you can definitely see the seam lines. You can see tape marks. You can see the blocks where they covered screw holes, things like that, because obviously it had to be mounted to the jib to be on the camera jib. There's places where you could see they disconnected panels and things like that. And over the years, it got abused. The poor thing is, but
Certainly did.
yeah. Last one. This is for closing. This is fun. Somebody asked, "What's your favorite dinosaur?"
Pachycephalosaurus.
There you go. Well, I mean, you're to me, you're a legend in this. You've been doing it a long time. I've read the books. Back to Trek Files. It was hugely an honor to talk to you in person. But that's all I had, really. I just
Well,
appreciate what you're doing. I hope that you would find a new home. That you.
I'm reasons to be quietly optimistic. I hope there will be news, not 6 months by any means. I mean, I'd like to think that within the next. I mean, if I say a date, then everyone will be like, "Oh, he got this far and it didn't happen."
Yeah.
But more like 2 to 3 months, possibly even sooner.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to it. I'd love to carry on my builds. I really have. I'm very positive about the Enterprise. I'm very positive about my Ecto 1. Not so sure about the Eleanor. I know that the licensing is difficult with the Eleanor, and you have to transfer that, and you have to hope it's still going to the same rate. I would hope it would, but because it's not made by PCT, for example.
All of these things you should be optimistic about. I think there's every chance for all of these things to be completed. I mean, I feel more positive about the chances of everything getting completed and there being news in the short to medium term rather than anything longer than I did a week ago.
Oh,
So
awesome.
I think things are moving in the right direction.
That's
Obviously, can't
it's
make any promises, but
yeah, but there's things in the works, right? I mean, we know that
I know more about what's going on than most people for sure. Um, and I have reasons to be optimistic, and I think there's every chance that people will get a good
I try to tell
response.
people just be patient, right?
Yeah.
Just
Well,
be
I
patient.
understand.
Don't throw things away. You
Yeah,
know,
don't throw anything away. I
just
definitely say don't throw anything away. I think there is every chance of a happy resolution.
and I think whoever picks it up, and it may be multiple people, bits and pieces of it is they have a really good opportunity to restore the faith, because we definitely
Yeah.
this has hurt Partworks and committing to $2,000 models over 2 years, and I have a really good opportunity for not only picking up existing subscribers but to have new customers and to really kind of restore that faith.
I think, I mean, there are a lot of people who genuinely care and who really want to make sure that people are able to complete their models. On top of that, the economics are such that not people aren't going to lose money by doing that. I think if you were in a situation where people were going to lose money, then it would be a much harder situation.
Right.
But there's every reason why people would be able to do this and still make a little bit of money out of it. As you say, it's a whole industry with sort of people want to make sure that people don't feel betrayed, that they don't leave with a bad taste in their mouth. Yeah, I think people should be optimistic. As I say, it would be a relationship with a new company. It's not like someone is going to buy Eaglemoss and deal with all of the problems that Eaglemoss left behind.
Yeah.
But someone coming in and offering a way for people to be able to complete their builds, I feel pretty confident that that is going to happen.
Right.
Who it is, I don't know. But
Yeah.
but somehow.
I appreciate your time a lot. It means a lot, and I'm sure that the people in the groups will appreciate the answers and you taking the time to answer them and
One thing I would say is what I am trying to do is if people can, in order to demonstrate to people the level of interest and the ease of communicating with people, because that is actually something not to be underestimated, because GDPR actually makes it a lot harder for us to contact people without their permission. So if people follow me on Twitter, I will, as soon as there is any news, that will be the first place that, somebody else may release it first, but that, as soon as I find out any news that's definite, I will be putting it out there. So, the more people can do that, the more it will help to convince people that there's, the right level of interest. And
well, maybe we can work on a petition, some kind of petition to put something together that says, hey, we want to continue building these.
I think people believe that the biggest problem is going to be the ease of communication. That's one of the things that has to be resolved. Because obviously, if Eaglemoss doesn't exist and people have signed up to be communicated to by Eaglemoss, then anybody taking it over, there are legal restrictions on what they can and can't do. So knowing that they would be able to reach everybody, whether it's through websites like yours or whatever, all helps to sort of mitigate some of that anxiety.
Well, go follow Ben on Twitter.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one way.
I do web design, so maybe there's something we can put together that does follow GDPR that says, hey, we can at least collect the emails of people that have collections that want to finish the collections, and that's all of them, not just the Partworks, the Starship collections,
everything,
the novel collections, whatever they are, just to say, hey, here's the interest that's still there, and the ability to communicate back out to those people.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly something of value. And the GDPR is a very complicated thing.
Yeah.
So there are people who specialize in it. So, we'll have to see what we can do. But that is one of the issues, is just making sure that people are able to communicate with everybody. And being able to demonstrate that really helps. obviously there are, lots of people who don't even use the internet. So
It's true. Well, that's all I had. This is great news. I appreciate all the information. It was definitely a learning lesson for me. So unless you have anything else to say, let you get on with the rest of your evening.
I think that's it really, just to say, have hope. And, I'm unfortunately not in a position to sort of give people anything definitive yet.
We'll keep an eye on your Twitter.
Reasons to be cheerful, reasons to be optimistic.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ben. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.